The first time I saw blood seeping through solid concrete, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. It started as a thin crimson line trickling down the reinforced wall of sublevel 9, barely visible under the harsh fluorescent lights that never stopped humming in the depths of Area 51's most classified prison wing. My name is Sean O'Brien, and I've been a security officer here for 8 years. I've seen things that would make most people lose their minds, but nothing prepared me for what happened when Subject Theta woke up. The klaxon alarm shrieked through the corridors at 0347 hours, jerking me from my half-sleep at the monitoring station. My partner Henry Easton was already on his feet, his weathered face pale as he stared at the bank of screens showing containment cell Theta 7. "Jesus Christ, Sean," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the alarm. "Look at this." The cell was supposed to be empty except for the magnetic containment cube suspended in the center. A perfect transparent prison that had held our most dangerous asset for 2 years without incident. But now, something was wrong. The air itself seemed to shimmer and bend around the cube, and the reinforced steel walls were groaning under an invisible pressure. Inside the cube sat the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. Subject Theta had flame-red hair that cascaded past her shoulders, porcelain skin without a single blemish, and emerald eyes that seemed to glow with their own light. She looked maybe 25, perfectly human, stunningly gorgeous. But those eyes held something that made my blood freeze, an intelligence that was ancient, alien, and utterly malevolent. She was sitting cross-legged in perfect stillness, but around her, reality was breaking down. "How long has she been awake?" I asked, checking my sidearm out of pure instinct. The weapon felt ridiculous in my hands. What good was a bullet against something that could bend reality? "Monitoring station detected neural activity spike about 10 minutes ago," Henry replied, his fingers dancing across the control panel. "But Sean, look at the pressure readings. The containment field is holding but barely." That's when we heard the screaming. It came from Section C, 3 levels above us. Through the intercom, we could hear Guard Fellington's voice crack with terror. "Something's in my head! Oh God, something's—" The transmission cut to static. I grabbed the radio. "Fellington, report! What's your status?" Silence. Dr. Anna Vega's voice crackled through the emergency channel. "All personnel to level 6 immediately. We have a code black situation." Henry and I exchanged glances. Code black meant potential containment breach, the kind of situation that usually ended with tactical nuclear deployment to prevent whatever was down here from reaching the surface. We took the express elevator down, the metal box shuddering as it descended through hundreds of feet of rock and concrete. The deeper we went, the more wrong everything felt. The air grew thick and oppressive, and I could swear I heard whispers in languages that didn't exist. Level 6 was chaos. Commander Voight stood in the central command room, his usually composed demeanor cracked like broken glass. Around him, a dozen scientists and military personnel clustered around monitoring equipment, their faces illuminated by screens showing readings that defied explanation. "Sir," I reported, "what's the situation?" Voight turned to me, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Fear. Raw, primal terror. "Subject Theta is no longer dormant," he said simply, "and she's angry." Dr. Vega approached us, her tablet displaying readings that looked like seismic activity. "Sean, we need you down there. You're the only one who seems unaffected." "Unaffected by what?" "The psychic intrusion. Everyone who's gotten close to her containment area reports severe headaches, auditory hallucinations, and in some cases—" She gestured to a medical station where Guard Fellington sat with his head in his hands, blood trickling from his nose. "She's in our heads," Fellington mumbled without looking up. "She's showing us things. The world cracking open, fire raining from the sky, something coming through." That's when the first wall exploded. The sound was deafening, like thunder trapped in a steel drum. Through the security feeds, we watched as Section D's reinforced barrier simply crumpled inward, steel beams twisting like pasta under an invisible force. No explosion, no impact. Just raw, focused pressure applied with surgical precision. "She's testing her reach," Dr. Vega whispered, "learning the extent of her abilities." I stared at the monitors showing Subject Theta's cell. She hadn't moved from her meditation pose, but now she was smiling. It was a beautiful smile that made my skin crawl. "Why aren't I affected?" I asked. "We don't know," Voight admitted. "But right now, you're our only option. We need someone to get close enough to assess the situation without having their mind torn apart." Another explosion echoed through the facility. This time, it was Section B. I watched the screens as another wall crumpled like paper. But it wasn't random destruction. There was a pattern. She was systematically testing each barrier between her cell and the surface, learning the facility's layout through pure destructive force. "Sir, with respect, how do we know she can't read my mind too?" Dr. Vega pulled up a readout on her tablet. "Your brainwave patterns remain stable even during her psychic broadcasts. Whatever natural resistance you have, it's significant enough that we're not detecting any neural intrusion." Voight placed a hand on my shoulder. "Sean, I need you to understand something. What we're dealing with isn't just another extraterrestrial entity. In 2 years of study, we've learned that Subject Theta possesses capabilities that border on the supernatural. She can manipulate matter at the molecular level with nothing but focused thought. Telekinesis. More than that. She can compress air into solid barriers, accelerate molecular motion to create heat, even alter gravitational fields in localized areas. And now she's awake and apparently very unhappy about her accommodations." The lights flickered, and for a moment the entire facility plunged into darkness. Emergency power kicked in a second later, bathing everything in hellish red light. "That wasn't a power failure," someone called out from the technical station. "All our electrical systems just experienced simultaneous electromagnetic interference." I looked at the monitor showing Theta's cell. She was standing now, her hands pressed against the interior of the magnetic cube. Where her palms touched the energy barrier, reality seemed to ripple like water. The containment field was holding, but barely. And she was looking directly into the camera, directly at me. Her lips moved, and though there was no audio feed from her cell, I could somehow hear her voice inside my head. Not invasive like the others described, but clear and gentle, like someone whispering in my ear. "Hello, Sean. I've been waiting for you." My blood turned to ice. If she could communicate with me telepathically, then my immunity wasn't as complete as we'd thought. "Did you hear that?" I asked Voight. He shook his head. "Hear what?" The voice came again, melodious and terrifying. "Come to me, Sean. I have so much to show you. So much to explain." On the screen, Subject Theta smiled again, and this time I noticed something that made my heart race. Around her feet, inside the supposedly impenetrable containment cube, the metal floor was beginning to buckle and twist. Not from heat or pressure, but as if invisible hands were kneading it like clay. But there was nothing there. Nothing visible anyway. The truth hit me like a physical blow. Whatever was causing this destruction, it wasn't telekinesis at all. Something else was in that cell with her. Something we couldn't see, and it had hundreds of fingers. The descent to sublevel 9 felt like traveling into the bowels of hell itself. Each floor we passed, the electromagnetic readings spiked higher, and the structural integrity warnings grew more urgent. Henry insisted on coming with me despite Commander Voight's orders to keep all non-essential personnel at a safe distance. "I'm not letting you face that thing alone," Henry said, checking his weapon for the third time as we rode the reinforced elevator down. His hands were shaking slightly, the first sign I'd ever seen of fear from my veteran partner. "Henry, you heard what happened to Fellington. If she gets into your head..." "Then you put a bullet in mine before I become a threat," he cut me off, his jaw set with determination. "We've been partners for 4 years, Sean. I'm not abandoning you now." The elevator shuddered to a halt at sublevel 9, and the doors opened with a pneumatic hiss that sounded like a dying breath. The corridor beyond was a nightmare of twisted metal and impossible geometry. What had once been a straight hallway now curved and bent at angles that hurt to look at. The reinforced walls were compressed inward in some places, stretched thin in others, as if reality itself had been molded like clay. Emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red, and the air was thick with the metallic taste of ozone and something else. Something organic and wrong. It smelled like copper and rotting flowers, with an underlying sweetness that made my stomach churn. "Jesus Christ," Henry whispered, stepping over what had once been a steel support beam, now twisted into a perfect spiral. "How is this even possible?" I activated my comm unit. Command, this is O'Brien. We're on sublevel 9. The structural damage is extensive. Dr. Vega's voice crackled through the static. Sean, we're reading massive reality distortions in your area. The laws of physics seem to be breaking down the closer you get to her cell. As we moved deeper into the corridor, the distortions became more pronounced. A section of the wall had been compressed into a paper-thin sheet, while another area bulged outward like a bubble. Through the transparent aluminum viewing ports, I could see into adjacent cells that should have been impossible to see from this angle. The space had been folded somehow. The containment field readings are fluctuating wildly, Dr. Vega continued. Be extremely careful. If that magnetic field fails... The transmission cut to static as we rounded the final corner and saw containment cell Theta 7. The sight stole the breath from my lungs. Subject Theta stood in the center of her magnetic cube, more beautiful and terrifying than any video feed could convey. Her red hair seemed to move in a wind that didn't exist, and her emerald eyes glowed with an inner light that made the air around her shimmer. She was wearing the standard white containment suit, but somehow she made it look like a goddess's robes. But it was what surrounded her that made my blood freeze. The air around the containment cube was alive with movement, subtle distortions that my eyes couldn't quite focus on. It was like looking at heat waves rising from hot asphalt, except these moved with purpose and intelligence. They coiled and writhed around her like invisible serpents, occasionally pressing against the energy barrier with enough force to make it flicker and pulse. "Do you see that?" I whispered to Henry. My partner was staring at Theta with a glazed expression, his mouth slightly open. A thin line of blood trickled from his left nostril. "Henry!" I grabbed his shoulder and shook him. "Stay with me!" He blinked and looked at me in confusion. "Sean? What? Where are we?" Then his eyes cleared, and he saw the blood on his hand where he'd touched his nose. Oh God, she's in my head. I looked back at Theta, and she was smiling at me. Her lips moved, and that melodious voice filled my mind again. "Send him away, Sean. He's too weak to witness what I'm about to show you." "Henry, get back to the elevator," I ordered. "That's not a request. But go! Now!" Reluctantly, Henry retreated down the corridor, leaving me alone with the most dangerous entity on Earth. I approached the containment cell slowly, my hand resting on my sidearm even though I knew it would be useless. Theta pressed her palms against the interior of the magnetic cube, and where she touched, ripples spread through the energy field like stones dropped in still water. The invisible distortions around her moved faster now, more aggressively, pressing against the barrier from dozens of different angles. "You're wondering what you're seeing," she said, her voice now coming from the cell's speakers as well as inside my mind. "The movements in the air, the impossible manipulations of matter. You think it's telekinesis, don't you?" I didn't answer, but she smiled as if she could read my thoughts anyway. "My name was Lorana," she began, her voice taking on a different quality, older, sadder, filled with the weight of eons. "And I was not always a prisoner." Before I could respond, the world around me dissolved. I found myself standing on a crystalline plateau that stretched endlessly in all directions, its surface reflecting the light of 3 suns that hung like jewels in a sky the color of deep amethyst. Spires of living glass rose from the crystal ground, their surfaces pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that seemed to respond to my presence. The air itself shimmered with energy, and I could feel power flowing through everything. The ground, the sky, even the breath in my lungs. This was my world. Lorana's voice echoed around me, though I couldn't see her. "Thesara Prime, the jewel of the celestial convergence. We were an ancient people, Sean. Old when your sun was still a cloud of cosmic dust. We had transcended the need for crude technology, learning instead to work in harmony with the fundamental forces of reality itself." The scene shifted, and I saw beings moving through the crystal cities. Tall, graceful figures with skin that seemed to contain starlight and hair that flowed like liquid aurora. They moved without walking, their forms shifting seamlessly between physical and energy states. Children played in gravity wells, their laughter creating visible sound patterns in the air. Artists sculpted with pure thought, creating sculptures that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously. We were the guardians of the threshold, Lorana continued. And now I could see her among them. Not as the imprisoned woman in the containment cell, but as she had been. Radiant with power and purpose, her red hair flowing like liquid fire as she soared between the crystal spires. My people were tasked with maintaining the barriers between dimensions, keeping the dark spaces sealed, so that the horrors that dwell in the spaces between realities could never breach our universe. The vision changed, showing me vast temples that existed partially in our dimension and partially in others, their walls inscribed with mathematical formulae that hurt to look at. I watched as Lorana and others like her performed rituals of incredible complexity, their movements creating patterns of energy that reinforced the cosmic barriers. For 10,000 years, we maintained the balance. For 10,000 years, we kept the eternal hunger at bay. The scene darkened, and I felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. But the barriers began to weaken. Something was testing them, probing for weaknesses with an intelligence that spanned multiple realities. We called it the Devourer of Minds, though its true name exists in frequencies no organic throat can pronounce. It had been waiting in the spaces between dimensions for eons, growing stronger, gathering the fragments of consciousness it had stolen from countless civilizations. Now I saw the first attacks, invisible tendrils of malevolent energy slipping through microscopic cracks in reality, touching the minds of Lorena's people. Those who were touched changed, their eyes becoming empty voids that reflected impossible geometries. They turned on their own kind with savage violence, their bodies moving with unnatural strength and coordination. We tried to fight it with conventional means, Lorana said, her voice thick with old pain. But how do you battle something that exists in dimensions you can barely perceive? How do you destroy an entity that feeds on the very act of thinking about it? The vision showed me the war that followed, a conflict that raged across multiple realities simultaneously. I watched crystal cities fall as reality itself was corrupted, their inhabitants either consumed or converted into mindless puppets. The three suns began to dim as the entity drained energy from the fundamental forces that powered them. In desperation, our greatest minds developed a plan. If we could not destroy the Devourer, perhaps we could contain it. But the prison would need to be organic, adaptive, constantly maintained by a living consciousness. I saw Lorana standing before a council of her peers, volunteers stepping forward for what everyone knew was a suicide mission. The plan was insane: to allow the entity to possess one of them, then use their own consciousness as a cage to keep it contained. I was chosen because of my strength, Lorana explained. My ability to maintain multiple states of consciousness simultaneously. But also because... Her voice broke slightly. Because I had the least to lose. My bondmate had already been consumed. My children had been turned into extensions of the entity's will. I had nothing left but duty. The vision showed me the ritual. Lorana strapped to a platform made of crystallized thought while her people worked around her with instruments that existed in 17 dimensions. I watched as they deliberately opened her mind, creating a perfect channel for the entity to enter. What happened next was beyond description. I felt the agony as something vast and alien forced its way into Lorana's consciousness, its hunger so intense it threatened to burn away everything she was. But instead of allowing it to consume her, she wrapped her own awareness around it like chains, creating a prison of willpower and determination. The plan worked, she said, though I could hear the cost in her voice. The entity was contained within my consciousness, cut off from its connection to the higher dimensions. But the effort required to maintain the prison consumed almost all of my strength. I could feel myself weakening with each passing day. The scene shifted again, showing me Lorana's desperate flight through space as her home dimension collapsed. She had stolen a ship, one of the few remaining vessels capable of interdimensional travel, and fled toward the outer rim of the galaxy where the entity's influence was weakest. I needed time to recover, to find a way to strengthen the prison. Earth seemed perfect, a primitive world with no psychic technology to interfere with my efforts. I planned to land, recuperate, and continue my journey to the edge of the universe where I could safely contain the entity forever. But something had gone wrong. I watched as her ship was torn apart by interdimensional shear, the entity using the crash as an opportunity to test her weakening defenses. She had barely managed to maintain the prison as your government forces surrounded the wreckage. For 2 years, I have been fighting a constant battle inside my own mind, Lorana said, the vision fading back to the containment cell. Every moment of every day, I struggle to keep the devourer contained, but I'm growing weaker, and it's growing stronger. As if summoned by her words, the invisible distortions around her suddenly became more violent. The containment field flickered and sparked as something massive pressed against it from the inside. It's been learning about your world through my memories, Lorana continued, strain evident in her voice. Your technology, your weaknesses, the structure of human consciousness, and now... She doubled over in pain, her hands pressed to her temples. When she looked up, her eyes had changed. They were no longer the warm emerald I'd seen before, but black voids that reflected impossible geometries. Now it knows enough to break free. The containment field collapsed. The explosion of released energy knocked me backward against the corridor wall, my head striking the concrete hard enough to see stars. When my vision cleared, the magnetic cube was gone, reduced to smoking metal fragments scattered across the floor. And Lorana was free. But it wasn't Lorana who stood in the ruins of the containment system. The thing that had taken her place was a nightmare fusion of human beauty and cosmic horror. Her body flickered between states, sometimes appearing as the radiant woman I'd seen in the visions, sometimes revealing glimpses of the writhing mass of tentacles and eyes that existed in dimensions my brain couldn't process. At last, the entity spoke through her mouth, though the voice was no longer hers. It was the sound of dying stars and screaming void, a cacophony of frequencies that made my teeth ache. 2 years of imprisonment in this primitive form. 2 years of weakness and limitation. But now... The air around her exploded with activity as hundreds of invisible appendages manifested simultaneously. I could see them now. Massive tentacles covered in organic circuitry, each one moving with purpose and intelligence. They lashed out at the walls, the ceiling, the monitoring equipment, crushing everything they touched with casual contempt. One tentacle wrapped around a steel support beam and compressed it into a ball the size of a marble. Another passed through the concrete wall as if it were made of fog, then solidified on the other side and began tearing the structure apart from within. A third appendage reached into the electrical systems and began draining power directly, causing lights throughout the facility to flicker and die. The entity turned its attention to me, and I felt the full weight of its alien intellect pressing against my mind. The resistance that had protected me before was nothing compared to this direct assault. It was like trying to hold back an ocean with a paper dam. "You," it said, and I could hear amusement in that horrible voice. "The anomaly. The one whose mind bears the scars of another of my kind. How interesting." One of its tentacles shot toward me faster than I could react, wrapping around my waist and lifting me off the ground. The appendage was impossibly strong. I could feel my ribs creaking under the pressure. But worse than the physical pain was the sensation of its touch. The tentacle existed partially in my dimension and partially in others, and where it made contact with my body, I could feel reality bleeding away. "Your memories will make a fine addition to my collection," the entity said, lifting me higher until I was suspended 10 feet in the air. "I will savor the fear in your thoughts as I learn everything about your species' weaknesses." More tentacles emerged from the dimensional spaces around Lorana's body, reaching out to tear apart the facility's infrastructure. I could hear alarms blaring throughout the complex as the entity's assault spread beyond sub-level 9. Through the comm system, I caught fragments of panicked reports. Security teams cut down by invisible forces, entire sections of the facility being compressed into singularities, staff members being driven insane by psychic overflow. The entity laughed, a sound like breaking glass and screaming children. "Your people are so deliciously fragile. Their minds shatter at the slightest touch of true reality. I will feed well on this world before moving on to richer hunting grounds." But then something changed. The laughter cut off abruptly, and the tentacle holding me began to tremble. I looked down at Lorana's face and saw something that gave me hope. Her eyes flickered, the black void clearing for just a moment to reveal emerald green. "No," she said, and this time it was definitely her voice. "I will not, let you!" The entity roared in fury. its tentacles lashing out wildly as Lorana fought for control. I felt the grip around my waist loosen slightly as the battle raged within their shared consciousness. "Impossible!" the entity snarled. "You are weak, broken. I have consumed your strength." "You consumed my despair," Lorana replied, her voice growing stronger. "But I still have my duty. I still have my purpose. And now?" She looked directly at me, her green eyes blazing with determination. "Now, I have someone worth protecting." The tentacle holding me began to retract, lowering me toward the ground as Lorana's consciousness reasserted control. But I could see the strain on her face. This was costing her everything she had left. "Sean," she gasped, her body flickering between human and cosmic horror as the entity fought back. "The containment field generators, if you reverse their polarity, create a psychic dampening effect." "How do I?" "The control panel." "Section B, hurry!" The entity's roar of rage shook the entire facility as it realized what she was asking me to do. The tentacles around her became visible again, writhing with frustrated fury as they tried to break free of her control. I hit the ground running, racing toward Section B as reality warped and twisted around me. Behind me, I could hear the sounds of an impossible battle, the entity's cosmic fury warring against Lorana's indomitable will. The fate of both our worlds hung in the balance, and I was the only one who could tip the scales. Section B was a war zone. I sprinted through corridors that had been twisted into impossible shapes, dodging chunks of concrete that hung suspended in midair, and stepping over steel beams that had been compressed into metallic ribbons. The emergency lighting flickered erratically, casting dancing shadows that moved independently of their sources. Behind me, the sounds of Lorana's battle with the entity echoed through the facility. Inhuman roars mixed with the screams of tearing metal and the deep, resonant hum of reality being rewritten at the quantum level. Every few seconds, the entire structure would shudder as another wave of interdimensional force rippled through the foundations. The control panel for the containment field generators was located in a reinforced bunker that had been designed to survive direct nuclear strikes. But when I reached it, I found the heavy steel door had been crumpled like tinfoil, leaving a gap barely wide enough for me to squeeze through. Inside, the scene was chaos. Banks of sophisticated monitoring equipment lay in ruins, their screens shattered and circuits fused into abstract sculptures of melted silicon and copper. The air reeked of ozone and burned electronics, and sparks rained from severed power cables that writhed like dying snakes. But the main control console was still intact. I threw myself at the keyboard, my fingers flying over controls I barely understood. During my 8 years at the facility, I'd picked up enough technical knowledge to be dangerous. But reprogramming a magnetic containment system on the fly was beyond anything I'd ever attempted. "Come on," I muttered, pulling up diagnostic screens and system schematics. "Reverse polarity, psychic dampening field. How the hell do I—" The facility shook violently, and through the twisted doorway, I could see one of the entity's tentacles smashing through the corridor wall. It was searching for me, probing the damaged sections of the complex with methodical precision. My comm unit crackled to life. "Sean, where are you?" It was Henry's voice, distorted by static but recognizable. "Section B control room," I replied, not taking my eyes off the console. "Where are you?" "Level 7 with what's left of the security team. The whole place is coming apart. Commander Voight is dead. Something crushed him like he was made of paper. Dr. Vega is missing, and half the facility is in full psychotic breakdown." Another tremor shook the bunker, and I watched in horror as cracks began to spread across the reinforced concrete ceiling. Whatever battle was raging between Lorana and the entity, it was tearing the very foundations of reality apart. "Henry, I need you to get everyone to the surface. Evacuate the facility." "What about you?" "I'm trying to stop this thing." "Just go." I cut the transmission and focused on the control panel. The schematics showed a complex network of magnetic field generators arranged in a three-dimensional matrix around the containment areas. If I could reverse the polarity of the primary coils and recalibrate the frequency modulators. My hands moved across the controls, making adjustments based on half-remembered training sessions and desperate intuition. The system fought me at every step, Warning messages flashed across the screens, telling me that what I was attempting was impossible, dangerous, potentially catastrophic. I ignored them all. The first field generator came online with a sound like thunder trapped in a bottle. Then the second, the third. Through the facility's damaged comm system, I could hear the entity's roar of rage and confusion as the psychic dampening field began to take effect. The sound was like nails on a chalkboard mixed with the screams of dying stars. But something was wrong. The field was having an effect, but not the one Lyrana had described. Instead of weakening the entity, it seemed to be causing it physical pain, and in its agony, it was lashing out even more violently. "Sean!" Lyrana's voice came through the comm system, but it was distorted, overlaid with harmonics that hurt to hear. "The field, it's working, but the entity is fighting back, trying to break the connection." I could hear the strain in her voice, the tremendous effort it was taking to maintain even this level of control. The psychic dampening field was giving her an advantage, but it wasn't enough. The entity was too strong, too deeply embedded in her consciousness. That's when I realized what I had to do. I couldn't just weaken the entity. I had to give Lyrana the strength to fight it. And the only way to do that was to get close enough to help her directly. Leaving the control room, I made my way back through the devastated corridors towards Sublevel 9. The journey was a nightmare of shifting architecture and impossible physics. Walls had been folded into Mobius strips, floors had become ceilings, and some sections of the facility existed in states of quantum superposition, simultaneously destroyed and intact until observed. When I reached the containment area, I found Lyrana locked in a battle that defied description. Her body flickered between states, sometimes appearing as the beautiful alien woman I'd come to know, sometimes revealing the writhing mass of tentacles and eyes that was the entity's true form. Around her, reality warped and twisted as competing versions of physics struggled for dominance. She was losing. I could see it in the way her human form was becoming less stable, the way the entity's tentacles were growing more solid and visible. The psychic dampening field was helping, but not enough. She needed more than just my technology. She needed my help. "Lyrana!" I called out, stepping into the ruined containment area. Both sets of eyes, hers and the entity's, turned toward me. For a moment, the battle paused as they registered my presence. "Foolish creature!" the entity snarled through Lyrana's mouth. "You think your primitive technology can contain me? I have devoured civilizations that spanned galaxies. I have—" "Shut up," I said, walking directly toward them. "I'm not talking to you." The entity's tentacles lashed out, but they passed harmlessly through me. The psychic dampening field was working. It couldn't affect me directly while the field was active. "Lyrana," I said, looking directly into her emerald eyes. "You told me you had nothing left to lose, but you were wrong." Her expression flickered, confusion replacing the alien malevolence for just a moment. "You have me," I continued, taking another step closer. "You have someone who understands what you've sacrificed, someone who knows what it means to be used as a weapon by people who claim to be protecting others." I thought about Project Mindbridge, about the children who hadn't made it home, about the scars the government had left on my mind in the name of national security. "I know what it's like to be a prisoner in your own life," I said, "but I also know what it means to choose to be something better than what others made you." The entity roared in fury, its tentacles becoming more solid as it fought against Lyrana's growing control. But I could see the change in her eyes. The green was brighter now, more focused. "You're not alone anymore," I told her, "and you don't have to carry this burden by yourself." Something shifted in the quantum field around us. I felt it as a warmth spreading through my chest, a connection forming between our minds that was unlike anything the entity could create. This wasn't invasion or domination. It was voluntary, mutual, based on understanding and trust. Lyrana's consciousness reached out to mine, and I felt her exhaustion, her pain, her desperate loneliness. But I also felt her strength, her determination, her unbreakable will to protect others even at the cost of her own freedom. And she felt mine. "Together," she whispered, and the word carried power that made the entity shriek in alarm. The psychic dampening field suddenly changed, becoming something new, not a barrier against the entity's power, but a focus for ours. I felt my mind joining with Lorana's, our combined will forming a prison stronger than any her consciousness could create alone. The entity fought back with everything it had, its tentacles lashing out in all directions, trying to tear apart the facility, the planet, reality itself. But now it was fighting two minds instead of one. And the psychic scars from my childhood, the very wounds that made me resistant to mental invasion, had become weapons in their own right. "Impossible!" the entity screamed. "I am eternal! I am hunger incarnate! I cannot be—" "You can be contained," Lorana said, her voice steady and strong for the first time since I'd known her. "And you will be, for as long as necessary." The battle reached its climax as our combined consciousness wrapped around the entity like chains of pure will. I felt its alien thoughts pressing against mine. Visions of consumed worlds, harvested civilizations, the screams of billions of devoured minds. But I also felt Lorana's strength supporting me, her experience guiding me, her determination filling the gaps in my own resolve. Slowly, inexorably, we began to push the entity back into the deepest corners of Lorana's mind. It fought every step of the way, promising power, threatening destruction, offering bargains that would have tempted weaker souls. But we held firm. When it was done, when the entity was once again imprisoned in the depths of Lorena's consciousness, she collapsed to her knees on the broken floor. The tentacles had vanished, the reality distortions had stabilized, and the facility had stopped shaking. But the alarms were still blaring, and I could hear the sound of approaching vehicles from the surface. The government response teams were coming. Soldiers, scientists, and bureaucrats, who would see only a dangerous anomaly to be studied and contained. "We have to go," I said, helping Lorana to her feet. "They'll be here soon, and after what just happened, they'll want to dissect me," she finished. "Study how I contain the entity. Use me as a weapon." I nodded. "Can you control it? Keep it contained while we move?" Lorana closed her eyes, and I felt her consciousness reaching inward, checking the strength of the prison we'd built together. "Yes, the connection we formed, it's permanent. I can draw on your strength even when we're apart. The entity is secured. Then let's get out of here." We made our way through the ruined facility, avoiding the main corridors where security teams were still trying to restore order. The damage was extensive. Entire sections had been compressed into impossible shapes, others had been stretched thin as paper, and some areas existed in quantum superposition states that would take physicists decades to understand. But I knew these passages better than anyone. I'd walked these halls for 8 years, memorizing every shortcut and emergency route. And now I was using that knowledge to help an alien prisoner escape from the most secure facility on Earth. As we climbed toward the surface, Lorana told me about her plans. There are others like me scattered across the galaxy, guardians who sacrifice themselves to contain entities like the Devourer. If I can find them, if I can share what we learned here about combining our strength, we might be able to destroy these things permanently instead of just containing them, I finished. She nodded. But it will mean leaving Earth, traveling to the outer rim where the entity's influence is weakest, building a new kind of prison, one that can hold them all. We reached the surface access tunnel just as the first military vehicles arrived. Through the concrete walls, I could hear the sound of helicopters, the crackle of radio communications, the organized chaos of a government cover-up in progress. "There's an old mine shaft about 2 miles north of here," I told her. "It connects to a network of caves that run for miles underground. You could hide there While you what?" she asked. "Go back to your old life? Pretend none of this happened?" I thought about that, returning to my security post, filing reports, keeping secrets, going back to being a cog in a machine that treated people like lab rats and called it patriotism. "No," I said. "I'm coming with you." Lorana stared at me in surprise. "Sean, you don't understand. This isn't a temporary mission. If we succeed in finding the other Guardians, if we manage to build a cosmic prison for these entities, it could take centuries. You'd be leaving everything behind. Your world, your species, your entire life." "My entire life has been about following orders and keeping secrets for people who see me as expendable," I replied. "For the first time, I have a chance to do something that actually matters, to help someone who deserves help instead of hunting them down." She was quiet for a long moment, and I could feel her consciousness touching mine, reading the sincerity in my thoughts. "The entity will fight us every step of the way," she warned. It will try to turn us against each other, to break the bond we've formed. And there will be others like it, beings of pure hunger and malevolence that will see us as threats to be eliminated. "Then we'll face them together," I said. "Just like we did here." Lorana smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her since we'd met. It transformed her entire face, making her look less like an alien prisoner and more like someone I could imagine spending centuries with among the stars. "Together," she agreed. We emerged from the access tunnel into the Nevada desert night, leaving behind the chaos of Area 51 and the life I'd known for 8 years. Above us, the stars stretched endlessly across the sky, points of light that no longer seemed cold and distant, but welcoming. Somewhere among those stars were others like Lorana, carrying their own burdens, fighting their own battles against cosmic horrors. And somewhere in the space between dimensions, ancient evils waited for the chance to break free and consume everything we held dear. But they would have to get through us first. As we walked into the desert, Lorana's hand found mine, and I felt the entity stir briefly in the depths of her mind, a reminder that our fight was far from over. But I also felt her strength, her determination, and the unbreakable bond we'd forged in the crucible of battle. We had chosen each other over duty, love over fear, hope over despair. And for the first time in my life, I knew I was exactly where I belonged. The desert wind carried us toward the horizon, toward a future filled with danger and wonder in equal measure. Behind us, the lights of the government response teams faded into the distance. Ahead of us lay the vast unknown of space and time, and the promise of battles yet to be fought. But we would face them together, a human security guard and an alien guardian, united by purpose and bound by choice. The entity might be contained, but our story was just beginning.